Hello, welcome to the Empire's Edge. Today we have a short story for you. This brief story opens a window into the life of a younger Boris Kirsonov during a chance encounter on the road leaving the Confederation of Duchys on his way to Worland Barony. So now, The Corman Road by Matthew J. Sienkiewicz. Dappled shadow and light fell on the hard-packed earth of the Corman Road, creating the illusion of a living, breathing thing. Boris Kirsonov wanted to kill it. With every footfall, he contended with the road. With every step, he affirmed that the road was his foe, taking him further and further from where he belonged, the front line of the Civil War in the Confederation of Duchys.
And I'll be on this road for a month before I reach Worland Keep,
he said to the trees as the shifting light and shadow continuously changed the look of his face. Boris walked, periodically shifting his pack, remembering the brief audience and conversation with the abbot of Arngol, Sigmund.
"We lack the facilities to train you here, Squire Kirsonov, because of the war."
Boris reiterated.
Because of the war. Because of the war. He's the most learned man in the entire Confederation, and he doesn't understand that I came to Arngol because of the war.
The road and arching trees didn't seem to care.
Squire, not even Esquire.
Boris pursed his lips and shook his head.
Fourth son of a third son.
He said to himself,
"How does he expect me to become a knight of Uco without Arngol's training? All the way from Quint Duchy and wouldn't even lend me a horse."
"Who?" Boris spun toward the sound as his hand went to the hammer hanging from his belt. An old man, digging fork in hand, stood at the entrance of a nondescript lane adjoining the road. If it hadn't been for the man, Boris wouldn't have known that it was a lane at all. And if the old man hadn't spoken, he wouldn't have known that the old guy had been watching him.
"Who are you?"
Boris asked.
"What are you doing there?"
The old man's posture remained the same as did his eyes. Clear, strong, a young man's eyes. They did more than own the land where the old man stood. They owned the old man's life experience. They held Boris, too. No one spoke for an awkward, uncounted number of seconds.
"My apologies, sir. I allowed myself to be startled and unjustly lashed out at you,"
Boris finally said. The young squire waited for a moment before saying,
"Well, I hope you can forgive me."
The Northman waited a moment more before subtly shaking his head and taking a step to go. "No offense," the old man said. Boris stopped again and raised an eyebrow. "One comment from a cross stranger doesn't flip my potato cart." Boris nodded his head.
"I see that."
They spent another awkward moment looking at each other before Boris took another step. "A lot of daylight left." Boris kept walking. "Yes, sir. You'll go 12 more miles. For a man of your height, that's 1,660 strides per mile. And now that I've said it, you'll count each step to see if I'm right." Boris stopped. "Or to make your stride match what I've said." Boris took a deep breath. "Either way, you'll be sleeping on the ground alongside the road. Maybe you'll happen on a farm, but probably not. I have 3 hours worth of potatoes to dig, but then I have a house with 2 beds in it and a pot of stew simmering on a low bed of coals." Boris faced the old man. "Lots of stew. And I'll have to split a wishbone or roll a die to decide which bed to sleep in. I have so many choices." Boris started for the lane. "Shovel's in the shed," the old man said. "You'll see it. And by the way, I'm John Russo."
"Boris Kirsonov."
The old man nodded and walked ahead. Boris found a hook in the weathered gray shed and hung up his gear. He picked through the tools. One side of the garden hoe blade was worn so far that it didn't have a corner.
"Right-handed,"
he thought. The wood of the shovel handle was polished smooth at the end and middle. The point of the blade was worn away into a wavy line of metal. Boris smiled and took the tool to the garden plot. The northern squire watched the Southland farmer dig in a particular pattern, lever potatoes from the ground with a garden fork, and flip them into baskets in a battered handcart. The old man did it again and again. Boris watched. "Those potatoes won't dig themselves."
"I've never done this before."
"That I can see." Boris shifted the shovel from one hand to the other.
"I don't want to ruin your potatoes."
Russo paused. "You have a high opinion of yourself." He got back to work.
Is there a right way to do it?
I'm sure. Boris Kirsonov planted the shovel in the ground and exhaled forcefully. That's not it.
I don't want to cut the potatoes in half with this worn-out shovel. You're using a big fork, you'll miss all of them. I'll cut them in half each time I dig.
Russo straightened up. Sometimes you have to. Nothing you can do about it. Boris eyed him for a few moments, then stepped the shovel into the ground at the base of the potato plant and levered up. Whole and half potatoes came free.
That's what I was afraid of,
Boris said. Keep going. Boris dug the row parallel to Russo's. Dust and grit worked into the creases on his arms and hands. He swiped the sweat away from his face for the 100th time with his dirty hand. With each potato plant, he cut fewer and fewer potatoes, but he always got some, and the old man continued to outpace him.
I never thought I'd learn to hate potatoes.
The cart filled through the afternoon, and periodically, Russo sorted them.
What does it matter, sorting them?
Boris asked. Russo hoisted one of the baskets from the cart. Might make a difference. He walked to the house, straight-kneed with hesitant steps, the weight of the basket against one leg. Boris watched him go, and though Russo left the garden fork, the squire continued to use the blunt shovel. Later, the Northman found the farmer, clean and resting, sitting in a chair by the well.
I thought you were coming back out.
Nope. I was done for the day 2 hours ago.
You could have told me.
For what? I stopped early because you were there to finish the work. Boris kept his lips pursed as he rubbed the dirt from his forearms.
How'd you know I wouldn't stop too? I got pretty tired of using that worn-out, blunt, broken-down, near-useless shovel.
Because you started. Their eyes met, reminding Boris of the youth in them. Go on, Russo finally said. Get cleaned up, supper's ready. He got up and made for the porch stair. I'll see you inside. Clean with his kit over his shoulder, Boris rejoined Russo by the fireplace. The light was low now, the aroma from the stew pot hanging on the chimney crane half in, half out of the firebox, mixed with Russo's pipe smoke. The chair was inviting. Russo ladled 2 bowls, passing one to Boris. Gratitude and thanks to Uko, Russo said. Boris closed his eyes.
Gratitude and thanks,
He echoed. And gratitude to you too, Russo added.
Me?
Russo nodded his head. Yes. You cut every one of the potatoes in the stew. I just sorted them out. The squire laughed and tugged at his ear. They ate and enjoyed the quiet. I've always thought, Russo said once he'd finished, that eating in silence is a reverence in itself.
How do you mean?
Well, not a formal prayer like an abbot or knight of Arngol would say, but a prayer nonetheless.
There is devotion in silence.
Russo nodded his head. Well, then let's pray together.
All right.
The squire centered himself, stilled his breathing, and closed his eyes. Prepared, he opened them again, only to see that Russo had spread a cloth with a painted grid on it on the table between them.
What is this?
Prayer, presumably, as long as we stay silent, Russo said, as he arranged brown and white pieces on the grid.
What is it?
It's called Lasden's Fist. Some call it King's Table. It doesn't matter. Boris nodded.
What do we do?
You're the tall piece in the center, Lasden's Fist. You, with the help of your dozen Knights of Uko, have to get to one of the Adlai trees in the corners. These brown pieces all around your force will try to stop them.
The round pieces of the Reclavinians in the Civil War, the white Theocent.
Russo's face wrinkled as he sought for the right words. I tend not to think of it in such a modern way. This war will end. The Confederation will find peace with itself. No, I tend to think of the brown pieces as the hordes of Berfidian. Boris's eyes widened, but he controlled it as soon as he realized what he had done. Russo didn't seem to notice. He turned his face toward the fire. But it's kind of backwards in a way, the old man whispered. The Knights of Arngol surrounded the forces of Berfidian, didn't they? Arngolian knights with Arngolian steel. But he stirred himself, returning his attention to Boris and the board. So, my force of 24 besiegers will fight to prevent the Fist escape. The pieces only move straight as far as you can go, but no jumping and no diagonals. And you take an opponent's piece by flanking it from opposite sides. But to capture the fist, you have to surround it on all four sides. Got it?
Got it.
Good. It's kind of emblematic, isn't it? Get to one of the Adelaide corners and you win. Get stuck on the road and you lose. Boris's eyes anchored to Rousseau's. The moment lasted an age until Rousseau finally asked, "Why do you hate the road so much, Boris Kirsonov?" The squire chewed his insides to force his feelings into sounds.
Going the wrong way.
A road doesn't know which way it goes. He pointed to the board. The fist doesn't know where the openings will be. What's the use cursing the road for being what it is? Boris looked up at him.
It takes me further from my life.
Anything about roads. They're at both places at the same time, son. Eternally linked. Where you've been? Rousseau held the fist in the middle square. Where you are? He moved it to an empty patch. And where you're going? He moved it to an Adelaide square and tapped a gnarled finger on Boris's chest. Live, right now, wherever you are. That's what a road teaches you. They played for hours in silence, winning and losing, until Rousseau stood, half waved his hand, and went to his room. In his own darkened room, Boris imagined himself home in Quint Duchy, but he lay awake thinking about the road. The next morning, Rousseau wasn't to be seen. Boris ate some of the cold stew and packed his gear. The pre-dawn light rendered the edges of the world indistinct and mythic. The squire could only wonder what Rousseau was... The squire could only wonder that Rousseau was up hours ago, somewhere on his farm, tending some task. He walked past the shed and saw a lump hanging from the low branch of a fig tree. He pulled it free, realizing it was the Lasden's fist board, for the cloth was also a bag, and the pieces were inside. Boris turned around and saw Rousseau. In the growing light, the squire watched as the old man moved smoothly through a series of longsword drills.
Crown.
Melded into...
Middle boar's tooth.
Then...
Short serpent.
Flowed into...
True cross.
And...
Upper serpent.
The old man paused after...
Middle iron gate.
Rousseau smiled at the young squire, raised his sword, and saluted him with an Argolian steel sword. Boris pulled his hammer from its loop and returned the salute, grasping the Lasden's fist bag in his other hand. He relaxed only when Rousseau turned away. Boris walked on, leaving the old man to dance his fluid moves between the shed and potato patch. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this story, and with Victor reading the part of Boris, completely appropriate, it was fantastic to read that along with you. We'll see you next week for the next episode of The Empire's Edge.